My aunt contested the will. My grandfather's video destroyed them. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m., delivered by a postal worker who made me sign 3 different forms with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I knew before I opened it that Aunt Margaret had finally made her move. Asterisk, notice of will contest, estate of Harold Eugene Morrison, deceased. Asterisk. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but certain phrases jumped out like neon signs: undue influence, diminished mental capacity, fraudulent manipulation of testamentary documents. According to the petition, my grandfather had been suffering from dementia when he revised his will 18 months ago, leaving me, his 23-year-old grandson, the bulk of his $2.3 million estate instead of his eldest daughter. I sank onto my apartment's second-hand couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and read the document twice more. Margaret was claiming that I'd somehow coerced Grandpa Harold into changing his will during his final months, taking advantage of an old man's deteriorating mind to steal what should rightfully belong to her as his primary heir. The thing is, I could understand why a judge might believe her story. On paper, it looked suspicious as hell. Grandpa had indeed changed his will dramatically, shifting from an even split between his 3 children to leaving Margaret a mere $50,000 while I received the house, the investment portfolio, and everything else of value. His other 2 children, my father David and Uncle Jerome, each got modest amounts, but nothing compared to what I'd inherited. Margaret's lawyers had apparently done their homework. The petition included statements from her witnesses claiming Grandpa had shown signs of confusion and memory loss during family gatherings. They'd documented times he'd forgotten names, repeated stories, or seemed disoriented about dates and places. According to their narrative, I'd swooped in during his vulnerable state, positioning myself as his caregiver and confidant while slowly poisoning him against his own daughter. What Margaret didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Grandpa Harold had anticipated this exact scenario with the tactical precision of the army colonel he'd once been. 3 weeks after his funeral, while I was still processing the shock of inheriting everything, I'd received a key in the mail along with a handwritten note, asterisk, safety deposit box 347, First National Bank on Maple Street. When Margaret shows her true colors, you'll know what to do. Grandpa, asterisk. I'd driven to the bank that same afternoon, my hands trembling as I turned the key. Inside the narrow metal box, beneath some old military documents and my grandmother's jewelry, I'd found a USB drive labeled with my name and a date from 2 months before Grandpa's death. The video file contained 47 minutes of my grandfather, sitting in his study with that day's newspaper prominently displayed, speaking directly into his webcam with perfect clarity and devastating precision. He documented not just his sound mental state, but also 23 years worth of Margaret's behavior, the financial manipulation, the emotional blackmail, the way she treated him like a personal ATM while barely visiting except when she needed money. But more than that, he revealed secrets about Margaret that would obliterate her carefully constructed image as the devoted daughter. Secrets that would explain exactly why she'd been written out of the will, and why she deserved every bit of his disappointment. Now, holding her legal challenge in my hands, I realized the moment had finally arrived. The question wasn't whether I had the ammunition to destroy her case, it was whether I was prepared to detonate a bomb that would vaporize what remained of our family forever. I called in sick to work and spent the next 4 hours pacing my apartment, the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket like radioactive material. Every few minutes, I'd pull out my phone to call my dad, then stop myself. David Morrison was a good man who'd spent 47 years trying to keep peace in our fractured family. How could I tell him that his father had left behind a nuclear weapon with my name on the launch codes? By 2:30 p.m., I couldn't stand the walls closing in anymore. I drove to Grandpa's house, my house now, though I still couldn't wrap my head around that fact. The Victorian sat on 3 acres of prime real estate in Willowbrook Heights, worth at least $800,000 on its own. Margaret had been eyeing this property for years, dropping hints about how it would make a perfect rental investment or how the land could be subdivided. I used my new key to enter through the front door, something that still felt surreal. The house smelled like Old Spice and coffee, exactly as it had when Grandpa was alive. I made my way to his study, where he recorded that final video, and sat in his leather chair behind the mahogany desk. That's when I found the manila envelope tucked into the top drawer, labeled Additional Documentation, for use only if necessary. My stomach dropped as I opened it. Inside were bank statements, canceled checks, and printed emails going back 15 years. Grandpa hadn't just recorded that video on impulse, he'd been building a case against Margaret for over a decade. The financial records painted a devastating picture. In 2009, when Margaret's husband lost his job, she'd borrowed $35,000 from Grandpa to save their house from foreclosure. She'd promised to pay it back within 2 years. The loan paperwork was there, signed and notarized. But the repayment records showed only $3,000 returned over the next 13 years. In 2012, another $15,000 for her daughter's wedding. In 2014, $8,000 for car repairs after her son wrapped his Honda around a telephone pole while drunk. In 2016, $22,000 for her husband's failed restaurant venture. Each time, Margaret had sworn it was temporary, that she'd make it right, that family helped family. The emails were worse than the money. Printed conversations where Margaret systematically lied about her siblings, feeding Grandpa manufactured stories about how Dad and Uncle Jerome were just waiting for their inheritance and never really cared about him. She'd positioned herself as his only loyal child while simultaneously bleeding his accounts dry. But the document that made my hands shake was dated just 6 months before Grandpa's death, a letter from Margaret's lawyer, not the one representing her now, but a different firm, exploring options for having Harold Morrison declared mentally incompetent. She'd been planning this move for months, researching how to have him committed so she could gain control of his finances. Grandpa had somehow obtained a copy of that letter. His handwritten note in the margin read, "She thinks I'm a senile old fool. Time to show her how sharp this fool's memory really is." My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Rachel, Margaret's daughter. "Can we talk? Mom's telling everyone you tricked Grandpa into changing his will. This is getting ugly fast." I stared at the message, then at the mountain of evidence spread across the desk. Rachel was innocent in all this. She'd actually visited Grandpa regularly, brought her kids to see him, never asked for anything. She had no idea what her mother had been doing behind the scenes. The USB drive seemed to pulse in my pocket. I could end this war with one video file, but the collateral damage would be biblical. Rachel would learn that her mother was a manipulative fraud. My cousins would discover their college funds had come from systematically draining their grandfather. Dad and Uncle Jerome would realize they'd been lied to for years. But Margaret had fired the first shot, and she wasn't planning to show mercy. I called Rachel back at 3:15 p.m., my voice steadier than I felt. Meet me at Riverside Coffee in an hour. Come alone. She was already there when I arrived, hunched over a latte with her dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. Rachel had always been the family peacemaker, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and organized the holiday gatherings. At 28, she looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with her 2 young kids. This is insane, Danny, she said before I'd even sat down. Mom's hired Peterson and Associates, you know, the firm that handled the Blackwood estate dispute. They're saying you manipulated Grandpa when he was vulnerable. What do you think? I asked, sliding into the chair across from her. Rachel's eyes met mine for the first time. I think Grandpa Harold was sharp as a tack until the day he died. I think he knew exactly what he was doing. She paused, stirring her drink absently. But I also think my mother is desperate. Desperate how? Danny, they're broke. Like, foreclosure notice, repo man coming broke. Dad's been out of work for 8 months, and Mom's been putting groceries on credit cards. She keeps saying the inheritance will solve everything, that it's rightfully hers anyway. My stomach clenched. I'd wondered why Margaret was pushing so hard, so fast. The legal fees alone for a will contest could run $50,000 or more. Rachel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. How often did your mom visit Grandpa in his final years? She shifted uncomfortably. Not as much as she's claiming now. Maybe once a month. Sometimes less. Her voice dropped. But she called him constantly. Always asking about his health, his finances, whether he needed help with anything. Did she ever mention having him declared incompetent? Rachel's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. What? Your mom. Did she ever talk about Grandpa needing supervised care, or suggest he wasn't capable of handling his own affairs? Rachel set down her cup with shaking hands. Last Christmas, she mentioned that maybe he shouldn't be living alone. Said he was getting forgetful and might need someone to help with his finances. But Danny, that was just concern for his safety, right? I pulled out a photocopy of the letter from Margaret's former lawyer. I'd left the original safely locked away. Your mom was researching guardianship proceedings 6 months before Grandpa died. Rachel's face went white as she read. The document was clinical in its language but devastating in its implications. Given the subject's advanced age and reported cognitive decline, establishing legal guardianship would provide the family with necessary financial oversight. This can't be right, she whispered. Mom wouldn't, she was trying to protect him. From what? From making his own decisions about his own money? Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and winced. Mom. She's wondering where I am. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Danny, what am I supposed to do here? That's my mother, but if this is real. There's more, I said quietly. A lot more. Before Rachel could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID made my blood run cold. Peterson and Associates. Margaret's lawyers were calling me directly. I answered on the third ring. Daniel Morrison. Mr. Morrison, this is James Peterson. I represent Margaret Morrison in the matter of your grandfather's estate. I'm calling to discuss a potential settlement that could benefit all parties involved. Rachel watched my face as I listened to the lawyer's smooth, practiced voice outlining their offer. I could keep the house and $500,000, while the remaining assets would be more equitably distributed among Harold's children. In exchange, I would acknowledge that my grandfather may have been confused when he made his final will revision. What's your timeline for a response? I asked. We'd prefer to resolve this amicably by Friday. Otherwise, we'll be moving forward with depositions and expert testimony regarding your grandfather's mental state. I should mention we have witnesses prepared to testify about Mr. Morrison's declining cognitive abilities. I ended the call and looked at Rachel, whose face had gone from white to green. They want to settle, I said. Your mom's offering me a deal. Take it, Rachel said immediately. Danny, please. Just take the money and let this end. But I was thinking about Grandpa's video, about the manila envelope full of evidence, about 15 years of systematic manipulation and lies. Margaret wasn't offering this settlement out of generosity, she was scared. She knew something was coming. The question was whether I had the courage to pull the trigger. I stared at Rachel across the coffee shop table, watching her mother's desperation reflect in her daughter's eyes. I need to show you something else, I said, pulling out my phone. But once you see this, there's no going back. Danny, don't. Your mom borrowed $35,000 from Grandpa in 2009. She's paid back $3,000. I slid the bank statement copies across the table. That's not even counting the $15,000 for your wedding, or the $22,000 for your dad's restaurant. Rachel's hands trembled as she scanned the documents. I didn't know the wedding money was a loan. Mom said Grandpa insisted on paying as a gift. There's a promissory note with your mother's signature. Her phone buzzed again. This time she declined the call, but I could see the panic building behind her eyes. How much total? $87,000 over 13 years. Plus interest that was never paid. I leaned forward. Rachel, your mom wasn't protecting Grandpa from anything. She was protecting her access to his money. Stop. Rachel pushed the papers back toward me. Just stop. You're talking about my mother. And you're looking at her signature on legal documents. My phone rang again, this time it was my father. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately regretted it when I saw I had 6 missed calls from him. The voicemail notification popped up within seconds. Danny, call me back immediately. Margaret's telling everyone you forged documents or something. Jerome's involved now, and he's pissed. This is spiraling out of control. Rachel caught enough of the message to look stricken. Uncle Jerome? What does he have to do with this? I called Dad back, putting him on speaker despite Rachel's frantic head shaking. Dad, what's happening? Where the hell are you? David Morrison's voice carried the kind of controlled fury I'd only heard twice in my life. Margaret's at Jerome's house right now, showing him some petition that claims you've been stealing from your grandfather for months. She's saying you had access to his accounts, that you were writing yourself checks. That's complete bullshit and you know it. I know that, but Jerome doesn't. He's talking about hiring his own lawyer to make sure you haven't touched anything that should go to him. Dad's voice cracked slightly. Danny, what the hell did your grandfather leave you that's worth tearing this family apart? I looked at Rachel, who was silently crying now. Dad, Grandpa left me documentation. Evidence of things that happened before he died. What kind of evidence? The kind that explains exactly why Margaret got $50,000 instead of a third of the estate. There was a long pause. Son, are you telling me Harold knew this would happen? Before I could answer, Rachel grabbed my arm. Danny, don't. Please don't do this to my family. But my father had hurt her. Rachel? Rachel's with you. Margaret's been looking for her for 2 hours. Dad, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Before you take any sides in this, before you let Uncle Jerome hire lawyers or let Margaret turn this into a war, I need 24 hours. 24 hours for what? To show you what Grandpa really wanted everyone to know. I ended the call and turned to Rachel, whose mascara had created dark tracks down her cheeks. I'm sorry, I said. I really am. But your mother fired the first shot when she decided to claim Grandpa wasn't competent. You don't understand, Rachel whispered. If you destroy her, you destroy all of us. My kids, my marriage, my dad, will lose everything. Not just the money, but each other. Your mom should have thought about that before she spent 15 years lying and stealing. Stealing. Rachel's voice rose enough that other customers glanced our way. You're calling my mother a thief? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the video file I transferred from a USB drive. 47 minutes of my grandfather's clear, methodical testimony waiting to detonate like a time bomb. Rachel, what would you call someone who borrows $87,000 from a dying old man and pays back 3% of it? She stared at the phone screen, then at me. Show me, she said finally. Show me the video. I hesitated with my finger hovering over the play button. Rachel, once you see this, you can't unsee it. And I can't protect you from what's in here. Just show me, she said, but her voice was barely a whisper. I pressed play and turned the phone toward her. Grandpa Harold's face filled the small screen, sitting in his study with that day's newspaper, March 15, 2023, clearly visible on his desk. His voice was strong and clear, nothing like the confused old man Margaret's petition described. If you're watching this, it means Margaret has contested my will, claiming I wasn't of sound mind when I made my final revisions. Let me be crystal clear about my mental state. He held up his driver's license, his medical records, and a letter from Dr. Patricia Huang dated just 1 week prior. Dr. Huang has examined me thoroughly and certified that I show no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any cognitive impairment whatsoever. Rachel's face went pale, but she kept watching. Now, let me tell you about my daughter Margaret Morrison, née Harold. Grandpa's tone shifted, becoming colder. In August of 2019, Margaret convinced me to add her name to my checking account at First National, claiming she wanted to help me pay bills online. Within 3 months, she had written herself 6 checks totaling $8,400 for what she called emergency expenses. The video showed Grandpa holding up bank statements, each transaction highlighted in yellow. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. When I confronted her, Margaret cried and apologized, claiming her husband Tom had been laid off and they were facing eviction. She promised to pay every penny back. That was 4 years ago. She's repaid exactly $0. Oh God, Rachel breathed. But Grandpa wasn't finished. In December 2021, Margaret told me that David's son Danny was asking her questions about my will, trying to figure out how much money he'd inherit. She suggested I might want to reduce his portion because young people today don't understand the value of hard work. This was a complete fabrication. Danny has never once asked me about money or inheritance. I paused the video as Rachel started crying harder. I didn't know, she said. Danny, I swear I didn't know she was lying about you. There's more, I said quietly. A lot more. My phone rang again, this time it was Uncle Jerome directly. I declined the call, but within seconds Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Where are you? Jerome is asking questions about money you supposedly knew about. Call me now. She's panicking, Rachel said, staring at the message. Mom never uses all caps unless she's really scared. She should be scared. I unpaused the video. Grandpa's voice continued, but Margaret's cruelest manipulation involved my late wife Eleanor's jewelry. In March 2022, Margaret asked to borrow Eleanor's diamond engagement ring for Rachel's anniversary dinner, claiming she wanted to show Tom's mother the family heirloom. The ring was appraised at $14,000 in 2020. Margaret returned a cubic zirconia replica. Rachel's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. No, she whispered. No, that's not, she wouldn't. I had the replacement ring appraised, Grandpa continued on screen. $47 at a pawn shop on Riverside Avenue. I have the receipt, along with security footage of Margaret entering that same pawn shop on March 18, 2022 at 2:47 p.m. The coffee shop manager appeared with a mop, but I barely noticed. Rachel was staring at the phone screen like it contained footage of her own execution. I never confronted Margaret about the ring because I wanted to see how far she would go, Grandpa said. The answer, apparently, is, all the way to court, claiming I'm mentally incompetent while she systematically steals my dead wife's jewelry. Rachel stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. I need air, she gasped, pushing toward the exit. I followed her outside, where she was bent over a trash can, dry heaving. Her phone was ringing non-stop now, Margaret's ringtone playing an endless loop. The ring, Rachel said between gasps. She gave me that ring for my anniversary. Said Grandpa wanted me to have something of Grandma's. She looked up at me with devastated eyes. I've been wearing stolen jewelry for 8 months. Before I could respond, a black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot with squealing tires. Margaret Morrison climbed out, her face flushed with fury and panic. Rachel, she shouted. Get away from him right now. The final confrontation was about to begin. Margaret stormed across the parking lot like a woman possessed, her heels clicking against the asphalt with military precision. She looked nothing like the grieving daughter she portrayed in her legal petition. This was pure predator, cornering her prey. Rachel, get in the car. Now. Margaret's voice carried the same tone she'd used when we were children and someone had broken her rules. Whatever lies he's been filling your head with. Mom, stop. Rachel straightened up, still pale but no longer cowering. Just stop talking for 1 second. I will not stop. This little shit has been poisoning everyone against me with forged documents and Margaret's eyes locked onto my phone, which was still displaying the paused video. Her face went from flush to ashen in seconds. What is that? It's Grandpa explaining why you got $50,000 instead of $1 million, I said, finger hovering over the play button. That's impossible. Harold never made any videos. He could barely operate the television remote. But Margaret's voice wavered, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Rachel wiped her face with her sleeve. Mom, did you borrow money from Grandpa? Of course I borrowed money. That's what family does, they help each other. Margaret's defensive tone confirmed everything. Your grandfather was happy to help us through difficult times. $87,000 happy. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I don't know where you're getting these numbers, but... From the bank statements in his desk drawer, I said. Along with all the promissory notes you signed but never honored. Those were gifts, Margaret snapped. Harold insisted they were gifts after I explained our situation. I pressed play on the video. Grandpa's voice cut through the parking lot air with devastating clarity. Margaret has repeatedly claimed that I converted her loans to gifts out of generosity. This is categorically false. Every dollar she borrowed was documented as a loan, with agreed-upon repayment terms that she has systematically ignored. Margaret lunged for my phone, but I stepped back. You can't destroy this copy, Margaret. There are others. This is doctored, she said desperately. Digital manipulation. Anyone can fake a video these days. With yesterday's newspaper. Rachel's voice was hollow. Mom, that's clearly Grandpa sitting in his study. I recognized the bookshelf, the lamp, everything. Margaret's phone started ringing, Uncle Jerome's ringtone. She declined the call, but it immediately started again. This is all just a misunderstanding that's gotten blown out of proportion, she said, but sweat was beading on her forehead despite the cool October air. Is Grandma's engagement ring a misunderstanding too? Rachel asked quietly. The color drained completely from Margaret's face. For 10 seconds, the only sounds were traffic from the main road and her phone ringing again. The ring, Rachel continued, pulling it from her finger. The one you said Grandpa wanted me to have. When did you replace it with a fake? Rachel, honey, you don't understand the full situation. I understand that this cost $47 at a pawn shop. Rachel's voice was getting stronger, angrier. I understand that you let me wear it to church, to family dinners, to my son's school play, while everyone complimented Grandma's beautiful ring. Margaret made one more desperate play. Danny's manipulating you both. Can't you see that? Harold was getting confused in his final months, and this boy took advantage. Mom. Rachel's voice cut like a blade. I was there. I visited Grandpa every week until he died. He was sharp as ever, asking about the kids' grades, helping Tommy with his math homework, beating me at chess. She looked at her mother with something approaching disgust. The only person who thought Grandpa was losing his mind was you. Because it was convenient for your lawsuit. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Jerome hired Blackstone and Partners. They're demanding a full accounting of every penny Harold spent in his last 2 years. Margaret's claiming you had power of attorney. I showed the message to Rachel, whose face hardened further. Power of attorney? Danny never had any legal authority over Grandpa's affairs. Actually, Margaret said, grasping at straws, we don't know what kind of legal documents Harold may have signed while he was compromised. He wasn't compromised, I said, fast-forwarding through the video to timestamp 2347. He addresses that specifically. Grandpa's voice resumed, I want to be absolutely clear that at no point did I grant Daniel Morrison or any other individual power of attorney over my affairs. Every decision regarding my estate was made independently, with full legal counsel, and documented through proper channels. Any claims to the contrary are false. Margaret's phone rang again. This time she answered with shaking hands. Jerome, I can't talk right now, her face crumpled as she listened. What do you mean, bank records? No, I never had access to, Jerome, you don't understand. She ended the call and looked at us with something approaching panic. Your Uncle Jerome is asking questions I can't answer right now. Then maybe it's time to start telling the truth, Rachel said. Margaret's last thread of composure snapped. The truth? The truth is that your grandfather owed me a hell of a lot more than $87,000. 28 years I took care of that stubborn old man. 28 years of phone calls and errands and listening to his complaints while David and Jerome lived their comfortable lives pretending Harold didn't exist. So you decided to collect payment? I asked. I decided to take what I'd earned, Margaret shot back. And when Harold started getting vindictive in his old age, turning against the daughter who'd sacrificed everything for him, I decided to protect myself. The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Rachel stared at her mother as if seeing her for the first time. Protected yourself, Rachel repeated slowly. By trying to have him declared incompetent. Margaret's silence was answer enough. My phone rang, this time it was Peterson and Associates again. Margaret and I stared at each other as it buzzed between us, both knowing that everything was about to change forever. I answered the call from Peterson and Associates, keeping my eyes locked on Margaret's increasingly panicked face. Mr. Morrison, we need to discuss some new information that's come to light. James Peterson's voice was notably less confident than it had been 2 hours earlier. My client may have overlooked certain financial transactions in her initial petition. What kind of transactions? I asked, though I could see Margaret frantically shaking her head. It appears there were several loans from your grandfather to Mrs. Morrison that weren't properly disclosed. We'd like to amend our settlement offer to account for these complications. Margaret grabbed for my phone, but Rachel blocked her. Let him finish, Mom. The new offer is as follows, Peterson continued. Mrs. Morrison would accept the original will terms in exchange for a mutual non-disclosure agreement regarding any private family financial matters. I almost laughed. So she gets her $50,000, keeps the stolen jewelry and unpaid loans secret, and I pretend none of this ever happened. That's a simplified interpretation, but essentially correct. Counteroffer, I said, watching Margaret's face cycle through desperation, rage, and something approaching terror. Your client returns my grandmother's engagement ring, pays back every penny she stole, and withdraws her petition claiming my grandfather was incompetent. In exchange, I don't release a video that documents 15 years of financial elder abuse. The silence on Peterson's end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Finally, I'll need to consult with my client and call you back. Margaret exploded the moment I hung up. You arrogant little bastard. You think you can blackmail me with some manufactured evidence? Mom, stop, Rachel said, her voice deadly quiet. Just stop digging yourself deeper. I won't be lectured by my own daughter about. About what? About stealing from your dying father? About lying to the entire family for years? Rachel's composure finally cracked. Jesus Christ, Mom, I defended you to Danny 20 minutes ago. I told him you were just concerned about Grandpa's safety. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Jerome. Margaret's stories aren't adding up. David and I are meeting at Harold's house at 6 p.m. You need to be there. I showed the message to Rachel, who checked her watch. That's 40 minutes from now. Margaret saw the text and went pale again. What stories? What did Jerome mean about bank records? Dad must have requested Grandpa's financial statements from the estate attorney, I realized. He's probably seeing the loan patterns for the first time. This is getting out of hand, Margaret said, but she was talking more to herself than to us. Jerome was never supposed to. David doesn't understand the full context. The full context of what? Rachel demanded. Margaret's phone started ringing again, this time it was my father calling her directly. She stared at the screen like it was a bomb about to explode. Answer it, I said. Tell him why you really contested the will. Instead, Margaret declined the call and turned to Rachel with pleading eyes. Honey, you have to help me explain this to the family. They'll understand if it comes from you. You can tell them how difficult things have been, how much we've struggled. No. Rachel's voice was flat. I'm not lying for you anymore. I didn't even know I was lying for you before, but I'm done. Margaret looked between us, seeming to finally grasp that her carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. If you release that video, you'll destroy more than just me. Think about what this will do to your father, to Rachel's children when they're older. Maybe you should have thought about that, I said, before you decided to steal from a dying man and drag his memory through court. Margaret's phone rang one more time. This time the caller ID showed Uncle Jerome, and we all knew she was out of options. The reckoning at Grandpa's house was going to happen whether she was ready or not. Margaret finally answered Jerome's call, her hands visibly shaking as she pressed the phone to her ear. Jerome, I can explain everything if you just give me a chance to. Even from 3 feet away, I could hear my uncle's booming voice cutting her off. Explain what, Margaret? Explain why Dad's bank statements show you wrote yourself a check for $4,200 last November while he was in the hospital with pneumonia. Or maybe explain why there's a $6,800 withdrawal from his savings account 2 days after his funeral. The blood drained from my face. After the funeral. I looked at Margaret, whose expression had gone from panic to trapped. You took money after he died. I had expenses, she whispered, still holding the phone. Funeral costs, legal fees. The funeral was prepaid through Morrison and Sons, Jerome's voice crackled through the speaker. I'm looking at Dad's records right here. He paid for everything in advance, including the burial plot and headstone. Rachel grabbed the phone from her mother's hand. Uncle Jerome, it's Rachel. What exactly are you looking at? Bank statements going back 3 years. Your father requested them from the estate attorney this morning. Jerome's voice softened slightly when he realized he was talking to his niece. Honey, I need you to come to the house. There are some things your mother needs to explain to all of us. We'll be there, Rachel said, ignoring Margaret's frantic head shaking. Danny, you there too? Jerome asked. Yes, sir. Good. Bring whatever documentation you've got. David's bringing the lawyer, and we're going to sort this mess out once and for all. He paused. And Margaret? If you're listening, you better have a damn good explanation for why Dad's checking account was emptied 3 days before Danny even knew he'd inherited anything. The call ended, leaving us standing in the parking lot in heavy silence. Margaret looked like she might collapse. 3 days after the funeral, Rachel said slowly. Mom, Grandpa died on a Tuesday. The will wasn't even read until Friday. I had immediate expenses, Margaret repeated, but her voice was barely a whisper. The lawyer said estate funds could be used for. You didn't have access to estate funds, I interrupted. I'm the executor. Any withdrawals would have had to go through me or the attorney. Margaret's face cycled through several emotions before settling on something that looked almost like relief. Fine, she said, straightening her shoulders. You want the whole truth. Harold gave me access to his accounts months before he died. He knew he was getting sicker, and he wanted someone he trusted to handle things. That's not what the video shows, I said. The video shows what Harold wanted it to show, Margaret shot back, some of her old fire returning. But there are bank records, signature cards, witnesses who can testify that he asked me to help manage his finances. Rachel stared at her mother. Are you saying you had permission to take that money? I'm saying your grandfather was more confused than he wanted to admit, and he gave me authority to make decisions when he couldn't. Margaret's voice gained confidence as she built her new narrative. That video was recorded during one of his lucid moments, but it doesn't represent his overall mental state. My phone buzzed with another text from Dad. Peterson and Associates just called me directly. Said there might be irregularities in Margaret's financial disclosures. What the hell is going on? I showed the message to Rachel, whose face had gone white again. Mom, please tell me you have documentation for everything you just claimed. Margaret's pause lasted too long. The bank has records of my authorized access. Authorized by who? I pressed. By Harold, obviously. Show me the power of attorney documents. Another pause. They were informal arrangements. Rachel closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Mom, in a space of 20 minutes, you've claimed the loans were gifts, then admitted they were loans, then said you deserved the money anyway, and now you're claiming Grandpa gave you permission to take whatever you wanted. She opened her eyes and looked at her mother with something approaching pity. Which story are you planning to tell Uncle Jerome and Dad? Margaret's phone started ringing again, this time it was her husband Tom. She declined the call, but immediately received a text that made her face go ashen. What now? I asked. Margaret's voice was barely audible. Tom says there are cars at our house. People asking questions about estate funds and bank records. The investigation had apparently moved beyond family disputes. Whatever Margaret had done in those final days was serious enough to attract official attention. Rachel looked at her watch again. We need to get to Grandpa's house. Whatever's happening, running away won't make it better. But as we walked toward our cars, I couldn't shake the feeling that the video I'd been prepared to use as a nuclear weapon might turn out to be the least devastating evidence in this whole mess. The drive to Grandpa's house felt like riding in a funeral procession. Margaret followed behind us in her Mercedes, and I could see her frantically making phone calls through the rearview mirror. Rachel sat in my passenger seat, staring out the window in silence, occasionally checking her own phone. 3 more missed calls from Tom, she said as we turned onto Willowbrook Heights. And 2 from my neighbor asking why there were official-looking people at Mom's house. My stomach dropped. Official-looking how? She didn't specify, but Rachel's phone rang, cutting her off. The caller ID showed her father-in-law's name. She answered hesitantly. Hi, Frank. I could hear Tom's father's gruff voice through the speaker. Rachel, honey, you need to get home. There are federal agents at your mother's house asking about bank fraud and elder abuse. Tom's scared out of his mind. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Federal agents. 2 suits with badges. They've been there for an hour, going through boxes they carried out from inside. Frank's voice lowered. Rachel, they asked about you specifically. Wanted to know if you'd ever had access to Harold Morrison's accounts. I never touched Grandpa's money, Rachel said quickly. I swear I never. I believe you, sweetheart, but they're asking about jewelry too. Something about a diamond ring that got reported to an insurance company. The engagement ring. I glanced at Rachel, whose face had gone chalk white. Frank, I need to call you back, she whispered, ending the call. We pulled into Grandpa's circular driveway behind Dad's Honda and Uncle Jerome's pickup truck. Margaret parked behind us, but didn't get out immediately. Through her windshield, I could see her gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Danny, Rachel said quietly, if there are federal agents involved, this is bigger than family drama, isn't it? Before I could answer, the front door opened and Dad walked out, his face grim. Uncle Jerome followed, carrying a manila folder that looked suspiciously similar to the one I'd found in Grandpa's desk. Rachel, thank God, Dad said, pulling his niece into a hug. We've been trying to reach you for hours. Jerome's eyes were fixed on Margaret's car. Is she coming in, or are we doing this in the driveway? Margaret finally emerged from her Mercedes, moving like a woman walking to her own execution. She'd reapplied her lipstick and straightened her clothes, but couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. Before anyone says anything, she announced, I want it on record that I've been trying to protect this family's privacy. Everything that's happened could have been handled quietly if certain people hadn't decided to air our personal business. Jerome's face darkened. Margaret, shut up and get inside. We have bigger problems than your hurt feelings. As we walked toward the house, Dad fell into step beside me. Danny, I need to ask you directly, did your grandfather leave you anything besides the will? Any instructions, documents, recordings? I felt the weight of the USB drive in my pocket like a lead brick. Why? Because 3 hours ago, a state attorney called asking about a safe deposit box that wasn't listed in the probate inventory. Apparently Harold had been making deposits there for months before he died. Margaret stopped walking so abruptly that Rachel nearly collided with her. What kind of deposits? The kind that suggest he was documenting something, Jerome said grimly. Something he thought might be important later. We reached the front porch, and I realized this was the moment of truth. Whatever was in that safe deposit box, whatever the federal agents had found at Margaret's house, whatever Grandpa had been planning in his final months, it was all about to come together. Before we go inside, I said, pulling out my phone, there's something you all need to see first. Margaret made a desperate grab for the phone, but Jerome caught her wrist. Let him talk. Grandpa made a video, I said. 47 minutes of him explaining exactly why Margaret got written out of the will. The silence stretched for 10 seconds before Dad spoke, show us. I pressed play on the video, and Grandpa Harold's voice filled the autumn air on his front porch. Dad and Uncle Jerome leaned in closer to see the small screen, while Margaret stood frozen like a deer in headlights. If you're watching this, Grandpa began, it means Margaret has contested my will, claiming I wasn't of sound mind. Let me address that directly. He held up a medical evaluation dated just 2 weeks before his death. Dr. Patricia Huang has certified that I show no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. Jerome's eyebrows shot up. He got a competency evaluation. There's more, I said, fast-forwarding to the financial evidence. A lot more. But before Grandpa could detail Margaret's loan history, Dad's phone rang with an urgent tone that made us all jump. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. It's Sarah Chen from Morrison and Son's funeral home. Answer it, Jerome said grimly. Dad put the call on speaker. Sarah's normally calm voice was strained with panic. David, I need you to come down here immediately. Federal investigators are asking questions about Harold's funeral expenses, and they're requesting records that don't make sense. What kind of records? Dad asked. They want to know about a $12,000 payment that came from Harold's account 3 days after the funeral. But David, we never received any payment from Harold's estate. The funeral was prepaid in full 18 months ago. The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to Margaret, whose face had cycled from white to green. $12,000, Rachel whispered. Mom, you told me you paid the funeral home. You said the estate was being slow to reimburse you. Margaret's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Jerome's voice was deadly quiet. Margaret, where did that money go? Before she could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Agent Patricia Williams, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with Daniel Morrison regarding the Harold Morrison estate. Please call immediately. Rachel read the message over my shoulder and grabbed my arm. FBI. Danny, what is happening? I think, Dad said slowly, staring at his sister, Margaret's problems just got a lot bigger than a family will contest. Margaret finally found her voice. This is all a misunderstanding that's been blown completely out of proportion. Yes, I made some mistakes with the accounting, but Harold knew I needed help with expenses. You stole $12,000 using a dead man's name, Jerome interrupted. That's not a mistake, that's federal fraud. My phone started ringing, Agent Williams calling directly. Margaret looked at the screen like it was a death warrant. Don't answer that, she pleaded. Danny, please. Once the FBI gets involved, this becomes public record. Everyone will know, the neighbors, Rachel's kid's school, Tom's employer. Maybe you should have thought about that, Rachel said, her voice hollow, before you decided to forge documents 3 days after Grandpa's funeral. The phone kept ringing. In 15 seconds, I would have to decide whether to answer and officially involve law enforcement, or give Margaret one last chance to explain herself. But Margaret's next words made the decision for me. The money was going to Tom's medical bills. He's been seeing specialists for months, and insurance won't cover the experimental treatments. I was going to pay it back as soon as the estate settled. What medical bills? Rachel asked sharply. Dad's been perfectly healthy. Margaret's face crumpled as she realized she'd just added lying about her husband's fake illness to her growing list of problems. I answered the call. Agent Williams, this is Daniel Morrison. Mr. Morrison, we need to meet immediately. There have been some serious irregularities discovered in your grandfather's estate that require federal investigation. Her voice was crisp, professional, and terrifying. Are you at the property on Willowbrook Heights? I looked around at my family members, all staring at me with varying degrees of panic and confusion. Yes, we're all here. Good. Don't let anyone leave. We're en route. The line went dead. Margaret swayed on her feet like she might faint. They're coming here, I announced. Now. Jesus Christ, Margaret, Jerome exploded. What else did you do? But Margaret wasn't listening. She was dialing frantically on her phone. Tom, listen to me carefully. You need to get to your brother's house in Albany right now. Take the kids and, she paused, listening. What do you mean they won't let you leave? Who won't let you? The call ended abruptly. Margaret stared at her phone screen in horror. Mom. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. They're at the house, Margaret said. Tom says there are agents stationed outside. No one can leave until they finish their investigation. Dad ran his hands through his hair. Margaret, I need you to tell us everything. Right now. Before the FBI gets here and this becomes a criminal matter instead of a family matter. It already is a criminal matter, Jerome said grimly. Wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. Christ, Margaret, you've probably violated half a dozen federal statutes. Rachel grabbed her mother's arm. Mom, please. If you ever loved me, if you ever loved your grandchildren, tell us the truth right now. All of it. Margaret looked around at our faces, her brother's fury, her daughter's desperation, my cold determination. Something seemed to break inside her. It started small, she whispered. Tom lost his job in 2019, and we were 3 months behind on the mortgage. Harold offered to help, and I thought it would just be temporary. But it wasn't, Dad said. Every time we got close to paying him back, something else would happen. Tom's back surgery, Rachel's wedding expenses, Kevin's car accident. Margaret's voice gained momentum, like a confession she'd been holding back for years. Harold never pressed us for payments, so I thought maybe he didn't really need the money back. So you kept borrowing, I said. And then Harold started talking about changing his will, leaving more to you because you were the only one who visited regularly. Margaret's eyes flashed with old resentment. It wasn't fair. I was the one handling his bills, managing his medication schedule, dealing with his doctor appointments. By managing, you mean stealing, Jerome said flatly. I was taking care of him. Margaret snapped. Do you know how many times I drove across town to check on him? How many nights I stayed over when he was sick? How many times did you stay over to write yourself checks? Rachel asked, her voice breaking. Margaret's silence stretched until we could hear cars approaching on the main road. The ring, I said suddenly. When did you sell Grandma's ring? March 2022. We needed $15,000 for Tom's restaurant down payment, and Harold had already said no to any more loans. Margaret's voice was hollow now. I thought if I replaced it with a good fake, no one would ever know. But Grandpa knew, Rachel said. Harold knew everything, Margaret admitted. He confronted me in July about the missing checks, the forged bank statements, the ring. That's when he told me he was cutting me out of the will completely. 3 black SUVs pulled into the driveway with a precision that made my stomach clench. One more question, Dad said quickly. The $12,000 after the funeral, what was it really for? Margaret looked at Agent Williams climbing out of the lead vehicle, flanked by 2 other agents carrying boxes of equipment. Legal fees, she whispered. I paid Peterson and Associates a retainer to contest the will before I even knew what Harold had left behind. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Margaret hadn't just stolen from a dying man, she'd used his own money to fund a lawsuit claiming he was incompetent. Agent Williams approached our group with the measured stride of someone who'd done this many times before. Mr. Morrison. I'm Agent Williams. We need to talk. Agent Williams was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of our family drama playing out on Grandpa's front porch. Her 2 colleagues flanked us like we were flight risks, which, given Margaret's earlier phone call about Tom being detained, maybe we were. Mr. Morrison, I understand you're the executor of Harold Morrison's estate, she said, pulling out a tablet. We need to discuss some irregularities that have come to our attention through multiple channels. What kind of irregularities? Dad asked, stepping slightly forward in that protective way he'd had since I was a kid. The kind that suggests systematic financial exploitation of an elderly person over several years. Agent Williams' eyes moved to Margaret, who had gone completely still. Mrs. Morrison, we've been reviewing your father's banking records, and we have some questions. Margaret's voice came out as barely a whisper. I want a lawyer. That's certainly you're right, Agent Williams said calmly. But before we go down that road, I'm hoping this can remain a civil matter resolved within the family. She looked around at all of us. However, that depends on the level of cooperation we receive and the extent of the financial irregularities. Jerome stepped forward, still clutching the manila folder. Agent Williams, what exactly has been reported? We're trying to piece together what happened ourselves. Your father's bank flagged unusual account activity in his final months. Large withdrawals, checks written to cash, account access after his death. She tapped her tablet. The insurance company also filed a report when Mrs. Morrison tried to claim a $14,000 ring as stolen property 6 weeks ago. Rachel's sharp intake of breath made everyone turn. You filed an insurance claim? On Grandma's ring? Margaret's face cycled through several emotions before settling on trapped desperation. I needed to cover the replacement cost. When I realized Harold might have left the ring to someone else in his will, I thought. You thought you commit insurance fraud to cover up the theft, Agent Williams said matter-of-factly. Mrs. Morrison, that's a federal felony. My phone, still in my hand with Grandpa's video paused on the screen, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is James Peterson from Peterson and Associates. Effective immediately, we are withdrawing as counsel for Margaret Morrison. Do not contact this office again. I showed the message to Rachel, whose face went from pale to green. Her lawyers just fired her. Smart move on their part, Agent Williams said, apparently reading over my shoulder. Attorneys tend to distance themselves when criminal charges become likely. Criminal charges? Dad's voice cracked slightly. Agent Williams, surely this is a family dispute that can be resolved through civil courts. Mr. Morrison, your sister has potentially violated the Federal Bank Fraud Act, the Elder Justice Act, and committed mail fraud if she used postal services for any of these transactions. Agent Williams consulted her tablet. The insurance claim adds wire fraud to the list. Margaret suddenly straightened up, some of her old defiance returning. Harold gave me access to those accounts. I have documentation proving he authorized my withdrawals. What documentation? I asked sharply. Signed authorizations. Letters stating his intent to provide for my family. Margaret's voice gained confidence as she built her story. Harold knew Tom and I were struggling, and he wanted to help discreetly. Agent Williams made a note on her tablet. Mrs. Morrison, we'll need to see those documents immediately. They're at my house, but your people won't let me. We've been through your house thoroughly, Agent Williams interrupted. We found canceled checks, bank statements, and several interesting items, but no authorization letters. The silence stretched until one of the other agents approached and whispered something to Williams. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Mr. Morrison, she said, turning back to me, we understand your grandfather may have left behind a video recording. My heart hammered against my ribs. The USB drive in my pocket felt like it weighed 50 pounds. How did you know about that? Your grandfather's attorney mentioned it when we interviewed her this morning. Apparently, Mr. Morrison Sr. was quite methodical in documenting his final months. Agent Williams studied my face carefully. We're going to need to see that recording. Margaret made a small, desperate sound. That video was made when Harold was confused and angry. It doesn't represent. Mrs. Morrison, Agent Williams cut her off. I'd recommend you stop talking until you have legal representation. But it was too late. Margaret had just admitted she knew about the video's contents, which meant she'd known exactly what Grandpa thought of her behavior when she filed her lawsuit claiming he was mentally incompetent. Rachel grabbed my arm. Danny, show them the video. Show them everything. As I pulled out the USB drive, I realized we'd moved far beyond family drama into federal crime territory. And Margaret's lies were about to be exposed not just to our relatives, but to the FBI. I handed Agent Williams the USB drive with trembling fingers, watching Margaret's face crumble as her last hope of containment evaporated. Before you watch this, I said, there's something else you should know. Grandpa didn't just make one video. Agent Williams paused with the drive halfway to her tablet. Excuse me. The safe deposit box Dad mentioned earlier. I found 3 more drives in there yesterday, along with printed emails and recorded phone calls. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the files I transferred. Grandpa had been documenting everything for 18 months. Margaret's knees buckled. Rachel caught her mother's arm, but I could see the disgust in her face as she did it. Jesus, Margaret, Jerome breathed. How long were you planning this? I wasn't planning anything, Margaret protested weakly. Harold was getting paranoid in his final years, recording conversations, hoarding documents. Actually, Agent Williams interrupted, consulting something on her tablet. We found the recording equipment in Mr. Morrison's study. Very sophisticated setup. Motion-activated cameras, digital voice recorders, automatic cloud backup. She looked at Margaret with something approaching admiration. Your father was quite the strategist. My phone buzzed with a call from the estate attorney, Patricia Walsh. Agent Williams nodded for me to answer it on speaker. Danny, thank God, Patricia's voice was strained. I've been trying to reach you for hours. The FBI requested Harold's complete files, and there are some things you need to know before they review everything. What things? Dad asked. Harold came to see me 6 times in his final 3 months, each time bringing more documentation about Margaret's activities. Bank statements, forged signatures, recorded conversations where she admitted to taking money. Patricia's voice dropped. But Danny, there's something else. Harold suspected Margaret was accessing other people's accounts too. The parking lot went dead silent except for the sound of Margaret's increasingly labored breathing. Other accounts? Agent Williams stepped closer to my phone. Harold discovered that Margaret had somehow gained access to his late wife Eleanor's IRA account, which had been in trust for the grandchildren. She'd been making systematic withdrawals for over 2 years. Rachel's grip on her mother's arm tightened. Mom, that was our college fund. Mine and Kevin's and Tommy's college fund. The IRA contained approximately $127,000, Patricia continued. As of last month, the balance was $31,000. Agent Williams was typing rapidly on her tablet. Mrs. Morrison, did you have legal access to Eleanor Morrison's trust account? Margaret's mouth moved soundlessly for several seconds. Finally, Eleanor always said she wanted her money to help the family during difficult times. Eleanor Morrison died in 2018, Dad said, his voice hollow. Margaret, you've been stealing from your dead mother for 5 years. I was helping the family, Margaret repeated, but her voice was barely audible now. Tommy needed braces, Rachel's roof leaked, Kevin's student loans. Kevin got a full scholarship, Rachel said sharply. He never had student loans. Margaret's carefully constructed justifications were collapsing in real time. Agent Williams made another note, then gestured to one of her colleagues. Mrs. Morrison, at this point I'm going to need you to come with us for formal questioning. You have the right to remain silent. Wait, Margaret interrupted desperately. There's something else. Something about Danny you need to know. Agent Williams paused mid-Miranda warning. What about Mr. Morrison? Margaret's eyes fixed on me with something approaching hatred. He knew. Danny knew about the missing money months before Harold died, and he never said anything. The accusation hit like a physical blow. That's completely false. Is it? Margaret's voice gained strength as she sensed a possible lifeline. You visited Harold every week. You helped him with his computer, his online banking. Are you telling me you never noticed $87,000 in missing funds? Agent Williams turned to study my face. Mr. Morrison, did you have access to your grandfather's financial accounts? I helped him set up online bill pay, I admitted, my heart racing. But I never monitored his transactions or... He's lying, Margaret said quickly. Danny's been managing Harold's finances for months. Check the computer records, the login history. This whole innocent grandson act is fake. Dad stared at me with dawning horror. Danny, please tell me you didn't know about this. The weight of Agent Williams' scrutiny felt crushing. In the space of 30 seconds, Margaret had managed to shift suspicion onto me, and I realized with sick certainty that my access to Grandpa's computer could be interpreted as complicity in her crimes. My phone rang again, this time it was Tom calling from Margaret's house, probably still under FBI surveillance. Margaret looked at the screen and smiled for the first time all day. Answer it, she said. Let's see what other secrets come out. I answered Tom's call with shaking hands, knowing that whatever he was about to say could either clear me or destroy me completely. Danny? Tom's voice was strained, almost unrecognizable. Thank God. Listen, the agents here found something in Margaret's office, and they're asking questions about you specifically. Agent Williams stepped closer to my phone. Mr. Morrison, this is Agent Williams with the FBI. What did you find? There's a folder labeled, Danny Morrison, Financial Access, Tom said, his voice breaking. It's got screenshots of Harold's bank accounts, printed emails, and... Jesus Christ, Margaret, what did you do? Margaret's face went ashen. Tom, don't say anything else. Shut up, Margaret. Tom exploded through the speaker. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? These agents are talking about federal prison. Agent Williams held up her hand for silence. Mr. Morrison, describe exactly what's in that folder. Screenshots of Harold's online banking going back 18 months. Login records showing someone accessed his accounts from our home computer. Tom's voice was hollow with defeat. But here's the thing, the screenshots show transactions that were circled in red ink, like someone was tracking specific payments. My stomach dropped. What kind of payments? Checks written to you, Danny. $2,400 in September for college textbooks. $1,800 in November for car repairs. $3,200 in January for your apartment deposit. Tom paused, and I could hear papers rustling. There are 12 payments to you over 8 months, totaling $23,600. Agent Williams was typing furiously. Mr. Morrison, did you receive these payments from your grandfather? Yes, but those were gifts, I said quickly. Grandpa helped me with college expenses and... Gifts that Margaret was documenting and tracking. Agent Williams' tone had shifted, becoming more suspicious. Why would she maintain detailed records of legitimate family gifts? Margaret found her voice again, stronger now, because Harold was giving Danny money while refusing to help my family with genuine emergencies. I kept records to show the disparity in treatment. Or, Rachel said slowly, staring at her mother with dawning realization, you were building a case to claim Danny was manipulating Grandpa for money. Through the phone, Tom continued, there's more. A printed email draft that was never sent, addressed to Harold's doctor. Margaret was going to claim Danny had been pressuring Harold for money, using it as evidence of elder abuse. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Margaret hadn't just been stealing from Grandpa, she'd been systematically building a case against me, planning to frame me as the real manipulator while she positioned herself as the concerned daughter trying to protect him. The dates, I said suddenly. Tom, what are the dates on those screenshots? Most recent one is March 8, 2023. That's 2 weeks before Harold died. Agent Williams looked up sharply. Mrs. Morrison, you were monitoring your father's accounts right up until his death. Margaret's silence was answer enough. Dad's voice was barely a whisper. Margaret, you were planning to destroy Danny from the beginning. I was protecting our father from financial exploitation, Margaret said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Rachel pulled out her own phone and showed me the screen, a Google search history for, proving undue influence in wills, and signs of elder financial abuse. The timestamp was from 4 months ago. Mom, Rachel said, her voice breaking, you've been planning this since before Grandpa even died. Agent Williams gestured to her colleagues, who moved closer to Margaret. Mrs. Morrison, you're under arrest for elder abuse, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As they handcuffed her on Grandpa's front porch, Margaret looked at me with pure venom. This isn't over, Danny. When that computer forensics report comes back, everyone will see who really stole from Harold Morrison. But I was thinking about Grandpa's video, still unplayed on Agent Williams' tablet, and the 18 months of evidence he'd been collecting. Margaret thought she was 10 steps ahead, but Grandpa Harold had been watching her every move. The real battle was just beginning. As the FBI agents led Margaret away in handcuffs, Agent Williams finally plugged the USB drive into her tablet. "Mr. Morrison, let's see what your grandfather really documented." The video began playing on the small screen, but this time I heard details I'd missed before. Grandpa's voice was crystal clear as he addressed the camera. "Today is March 15th, 2023, and I am recording this because my daughter Margaret Morrison has just left my house after demanding I give her power of attorney over my finances." Agent Williams paused the video. This was recorded the same day Mrs. Morrison accessed his accounts. "There's more," I said, pulling out the additional files from the safe deposit box. Audio recordings of their conversations. The next file was devastating. Margaret's voice came through clearly. "Dad, you're getting confused about money. Let me handle the bills so you don't accidentally pay something twice." Then Grandpa's response: "Margaret, I've been balancing checkbooks since before you were born. The only confusion is why my account is missing $8,000. Agent Williams looked up sharply. He was recording their conversations. Every interaction for the last year, I confirmed. Grandpa was a retired Army intelligence officer. He knew exactly what Margaret was doing. Rachel, who had been silent since her mother's arrest, suddenly spoke up. "Play the one from Christmas Day." I found the file dated December 25th, 2022. Grandpa's voice filled the air. "Margaret just offered to help me write checks for Christmas gifts. She suggested I make them out to cash so they'd be easier for recipients to deposit. When I refused, she said I was becoming too stubborn to handle my own finances." The final piece of evidence was a written statement, notarized and dated March 20th, 2023, 3 days before Grandpa died. "I, Harold Eugene Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby state that any claims of mental incompetence made by my daughter Margaret are false and motivated by her desire to access funds she has systematically stolen from my accounts. I have documented every theft, every lie, and every attempt at manipulation. Margaret Morrison is a danger to vulnerable elderly people, and I pray this evidence protects others from suffering what I have endured." Agent Williams closed her tablet and looked at me with something approaching respect. "Your grandfather was quite the detective. He was protecting everyone, I realized. Not just himself, but other families who might face this kind of manipulation." 3 hours later, we had the complete picture. Margaret had stolen $127,000 from the family trust, $94,000 from Grandpa's accounts, committed insurance fraud, and attempted to frame me for elder abuse. The computer forensics Tom had mentioned actually worked in my favor. The login records showed Margaret had been accessing Grandpa's accounts remotely using password recovery, not through any access I provided. 6 months later, Margaret pled guilty to federal elder abuse charges and was sentenced to 4 years in prison plus full restitution. The family trust was restored, Rachel's children got their college fund back, and Tom filed for divorce. The house on Willowbrook Heights still feels too big for me, but I've started hosting Sunday dinners for Dad, Uncle Jerome, Rachel, and her kids. We don't talk about Margaret much, but when we do, it's with sadness rather than anger. Grandpa's final video message wasn't just about protecting his will, it was about protecting all of us from someone who had learned to weaponize family loyalty. His evidence didn't just destroy Margaret's case, it probably prevented her from targeting other elderly relatives or neighbors. Sometimes I sit in his study and think about the 18 months he spent documenting everything, knowing his own daughter was stealing from him but methodically building a case anyway. It wasn't revenge he wanted, it was justice. And in the end, that's exactly what he got.